Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Aubrey Guffrey. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm pleased to join you tonight to talk with you about social media and student mental health. This is a two-part program, and tonight we will focus primarily on statistics related to social media use and ways to help keep your kids safe online. Thank you for joining for the presentation this evening. During the course of this presentation, you will have an opportunity to learn some basic statistics and understandings about social media and the impact of social media on mental health. We'll have opportunities to review and discuss strategies that will ideally increase social media safety. And we will review 5 online safety tips that you may help support your child with as they're learning to navigate social media. If there are questions that you have during the course of this presentation, please feel free to write them out in the question and answer box. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have an opportunity to review them and try to answer some of the questions for you. So to begin, let's think for a moment about how social media use shows up in your life. So if you were being honest with yourself, how would you answer this question? Can you watch a full movie without looking at your cell phone? Take a moment and think about that. Perhaps it's a conversation you've had with others in your life. Could you go a few days without using your cell phone? And how much time do you think you spend on your phone or being online? Perhaps some of you are able to access that information when you look at screen time usage and things of that nature. But the point of this little quiz, so to speak, is to help us understand the reality of what social media use may look like for some teenagers, some teens, and some children, given perhaps our use and relationship with social media. I won't read this entire quote for you. However, I think it's important to appreciate the context of how social media shows up in our lives. One of the things that I hope that you will take away from this presentation is how you would like to consider having a relationship with screens and having a relationship with social media. Of course, there are many ways that we can limit use for our children, and there are many ways that we can limit use for ourselves. And it's important to note that having exposure to social media is likely to occur while at school, on the school bus, at a friend's house, even if a child doesn't have their own social media accounts. This quote really tries to impart how important social media presence has, the importance that social media presence has for teenagers and younger children. The importance of how many likes a post or a picture might receive. This can serve as a reinforcing model where there is frequent or what might even feel like constant checking to determine how many people have liked what was posted online. It gets really sticky in there because that idea of so many people liked this can often get wrapped up in self-worth and self-esteem. And so thinking some about how can we help support our children have a healthier relationship with social media may be one way that we can help them curb some of the side effects of social media use on their mental health. We can see in the last several years, there is a significant shift of screen time and social media use. And we look at then the comparison between that use and also mental health diagnoses in children and adolescents. So with more social media, with more usage of phones and less time with unstructured play, there is concern that that combination is influencing the experience of anxiety and depression symptoms in children. We'll pause here to watch a 4-ish minute video on some of the elements related to social media use. Keith, if you're able to cue that, that would be great.
Social media has become part of our nature. We post, we share, we like, we follow, we unfollow, we subscribe. But how is social media affecting us? A small study of 20 college students found a correlation between students who demonstrated higher levels of Facebook addiction and activity in the amygdala striatal system while they interacted with Facebook symbols. This activation was the same seen in those with substance addiction. In a 2016 UCLA study, teens were split into two groups. One was shown a photo with a high number of likes, and the other group was shown the same photo, but with fewer likes. Those who viewed the photo with more likes were more likely to like the photo themselves than the group who saw the photo with fewer likes. Again, it was the same picture. This experiment found activity in multiple parts of the brain when teens saw photos they took receive a lot of likes. In particular, the study found significant activity in part of the brain's reward circuitry known as the nucleus accumbens. Dopamine is released in the brain after positive social stimuli, such as likes and positive comments on social media. That photo she just posted, she got a bunch of likes, releasing dopamine into her brain and causing a feeling of satisfaction. Psychologist B.F. Skinner found that mice would respond to certain stimuli they knew resulted in a reward more often when the reward came at variable times. This theory can also be applied to social media and the times we check it looking for a reward in terms of a like, comment, or message. We habitually check our accounts, but we are not always rewarded. Maybe this photo didn't get the amount of likes you wanted, so you will try again and again and again, looking for that reward. But wait, something else. Have you ever felt your phone vibrate when it really didn't? According to Robert Rosenberger of the Georgia Institute of Technology, we've become so connected to our phones that they've sort of become part of our bodies. Anytime something stimulates or triggers sensation in an area where you keep your phone, you might believe it's your phone. This is called phantom vibration syndrome. Studies show that nearly 90% of people report experiencing these phantom vibrations.
Actually, Keith, we can stop here. Thank you. I think it just loops again. Thank you for that. So I think it's reasonable to wonder out loud about the relationship between social media use and how that impacts mental health. There are numerous research studies that indicate data that adult Americans are picking up their phone more than 100 times during the day. These same research studies indicate that people under the age of 18 are spending, on average, about 7 hours on their devices. How much of this time is spent on social media where these kinds of dopamine hits are the intended expectation or wish without even knowing what's happening at a brain level. Here are some statistics that may or may not surprise you. Almost 70% of adults and 81% of teenagers in the United States use social media. So a significant number of people walking around with social media accounts. Teenagers and young adult users who spend most of their time on social media platforms like Instagram or Facebook were shown to have a substantially higher rate of reported depression symptoms than those who spent less time on those platforms. There are a lot of research studies that are trying to appreciate and understand why that may be the case. However, what we do know is that with increased use of social media comes increased propensity for the experience of mental health concerns related to anxiety and depression. About 25% of teenagers will report that using social media has a negative effect. However, many of those same reportees will share that they themselves continue to use social media. Before I talk some about the negative effects of social media, I think it's important to revisit this idea of how do we relate to it? If you're anything like me, my parents didn't need to talk to me about this when I was in high school and earlier because social media wasn't a thing. Cell phones didn't really exist at that point. I had AOL Messenger. So there wasn't enough data and use to really understand the effects. And so, like your child, you may be walking into the use of social media as sort of a new frontier. And again, if you're anything like me, your child or the children who live with you may say things like, well, everyone has TikTok, everyone has social media. And trying to figure out with knowledge and support that feels right for you, how to help your child interact and relate to screens and social media. So to talk some about the negative effects of social media, first and foremost, we do have an awareness, as I've mentioned earlier, about the increased use of social media and the increased presentation of symptoms of depression and anxiety in people under the age of 18. Again, if we're constantly seeking that quick dopamine hit and we're not receiving it, what is happening in the absence of that? And how does that get converted into anxiety or depression symptoms? Neuroscientists are trying to understand that at the brain level, but I think we can see that sometimes kids will come home in a grumpy mood and will share some version of a story around something that impacted them on social media. We also have an awareness that the use of social media can also impact self-esteem through body image. And so this is in relation to to how people compare themselves. Perhaps you've seen this on some of the content that you might view yourselves, where people are posting videos of their highlight reel, as I might say. So the things that are going well for them without really mentioning or sharing some of the things that might be most challenging. This also happens with teenagers and children, but they don't have a worldview or enough lived experience to appreciate that what they might be seeing is a highlight reel as well, and use that data or information as a point of comparison, and that may begin to impact their overall well-being. The use of social media also can create a false sense of connection between people. So it's quite interesting that we're sharing this virtual space here together. And I wonder if we were meeting physically in the same room with one another, what that might be like. And so there are certainly benefits and pros to having a virtual space. But when people are trying to seek connection through the use of social media, what they might find are dangerous consequences or significant disappointment that the person on the other side of that phone screen isn't who they say they are. We certainly know that social media can and has led to cyberbullying. So families would do well to talk to children about how to manage their own behavior on social media platforms and what to do when they themselves are experiencing bullying. We do have worry and concern that social media use can also lead to addiction. So really, the things that we would want to pay attention to is increased irritability with significant and prolonged social media use, as well as increased irritability when someone doesn't have access to that screen or that social media platform. So that would be a telltale sign that there may be some concern about addiction happening. But we do understand how those dopamine hits, as we saw in the video, can lead to a sense of reward, and how that just feels pleasurable. So we engage in similar behavior to try to achieve that reward or that pleasurable feeling over and over again. When people sleep with their phones or devices in their bedroom, we know that may delay sleep onset for a couple of reasons. One, it may be because the light that comes in through their eyes is tricking their brain into thinking that it's not actually nighttime, and therefore delays the onset of the brain mechanisms that help to initiate sleep. When that occurs, someone may then struggle with falling asleep, turn to their phone in order to help them feel more tired, which actually serves to reinforce that problem and delay sleep further and further. The tricky part about that is that the start of the school day doesn't shift and change depending on when the child was able to fall asleep at night. There's always that hard stop. And so if they don't have access to that phone and they don't have a screen in front of their eyes close to the time that they'd like to go to sleep, it's letting the brain know that it's time for bed. And there is not then access to that content that may in fact keep that child awake longer. These next two impacts may be related in terms of having unrealistic views and expectations related to how people live their lives. That may also, again, be related to body image, the things that people have, the ways in which they spend their time. It can absolutely alter people's expectations of how to be in a relationship with someone based on what they see from the online platforms. This may be coupled with the fear of missing out, or FOMO. And certainly when a child, and this may be true for adults, so when someone sees that acquaintances or friends are all together and they've not received an invite, that can absolutely lead to a sense of distress, discomfort, worry, low or sad mood, and ultimately create a wedge in how to have relationships with other people. This, I think, is quite interesting because of the way that social media platforms work. There is this distance. Someone is able to post something anonymously under a certain name that doesn't belong to them. And there are a lot of ways that people can share information that may heighten their sense of self-importance. This is often called social media narcissism. What happens is that this can often lead to bullying, or at the very least putting people down in order to receive more likes, which again creates that false sense of importance and triggers that reward system in our brain to appreciate, oh yes, I like that, I'd like to do more of that. And again, with the sense of toxic comparison, really shifting people's behaviors to stopping an activity that they really enjoyed, or feeling like they can't possibly try out for a team or a performance because they're not nearly as good as the kids that they've seen post in other places. These kinds of comparison points can really stop people from living the life that brings them the most joy. So we'll shift a bit to talk some about what are some of the things that you can do as caregivers and parents. So the first thing to do is to familiarize yourself as best you can with the ever-changing landscape of social media. And so listed here are several of the social media platforms. And probably at this point, there's social media platforms that are being developed and used that we don't even know about. So having a conversation with your child about what platforms they're aware of, which ones they use, which ones their friends use, so that you are able to share in the same knowledge and have the same language as they have. One thing to keep in mind about age limits is that generally speaking, social media platforms will require someone to be at least the age of 13 before signing up and registering for a profile on that platform. There's nothing to say that those birth dates can't be tweaked. Some of the things that you may do is create a framework for how, again, you would like to encourage your child to have a relationship with social media. And in your family, in your worldview, you may have some conversations with yourself or with the adults in your family, other caregivers, around how do we want to consider privacy with this child and social media use. And so at first, the recommendation is to have privacy checks with your child on a very regular basis. So that might be reviewing text messages with your child. That may be reviewing the followers that they have, who they are following, what is happening in their DMs. Just trying to appreciate and understand with them that they're learning how to do this, and they may need support and education on how to take care of themselves as they're learning how to walk into this new world of social media use. A main recommendation is to keep profiles private and to only accept friend requests from people they know. In my clinical practice, this is a cause of concern for most parents who talk to me about their child's social media use and some of the damaging effects that may result from a child thinking that they were talking to a same age peer when in fact it was someone impersonating a teenager or a child. So wanting to be clear with your expectations around how you would like your child to relate to social media use, that one expectation is that they only accept those requests from people they actually know in real life. Really educating our kids on what to post and what not to post is very, very important because they often don't know. Again, they don't have the lived experience around why it's not helpful to post their address on a social media picture, why it is dangerous potentially to share their phone number on a social media platform. So really pausing and thinking about what would be examples of appropriate or inappropriate personal data that can be shared on social media platforms. It's really important that kids appreciate how and what they share in the same way as you have shared with them. Don't go with a stranger. So to that point, it's also important to understand and have conversation about what your child is posting. And there may be mistakes along the way. So having open and honest conversations about why some posts may be appropriate and why others may be inappropriate. And this doesn't have to be a bullying behavior. It doesn't have to be something that may be illegal. It could simply be something that is inconsistent with your values as a family, and wanting to share with your child what are some of the ways that are appropriate or acceptable for them to share information on these platforms. Another point to consider, especially with children who may not have access to social media platforms, is to ask your child to consider asking a friend, are you okay if I post this dance or video or picture of us on social media? You may also want to encourage your child to ask people that they are around, whether or not they have social media, if they can be asked if something may be shared on social media from another separate account. That way, we're really encouraging kids to be proactive about what is shared virtually. And we'll get to that point in just a moment. Some of these things may be features and factors that we've long considered. Some of your employers may prompt you to change your passwords with some regularity. I think there's this really funny quote. It's from the movie Spaceballs from the 1980s. And it's when one character is giving the password for luggage, I think, to another character, and says that their password is 12345. It's a combination on their luggage, right? So it's a silly point, a silly example rather, to make the point to really encourage your child to use strong and secure passwords. Some of those tips may include using upper and lower case letters, using numbers and symbols. And in fact, there are some platforms that will also deny a password because it's deemed not strong enough. It's really important to advise your child not to include personal data as a password. So not using names of family members or pets, even friends, staying away from significant dates like birthdays, anniversaries, things of that nature. Again, really only accepting friend requests from people that they know. Using age-appropriate language and content, it's important to share with kids the reasons why this is so important as a way to increase their own sense of agency and to create their own sense of being able to protect themselves in this virtual world. No matter the rules and guidelines that you offer with your child or for your child, it's important to appreciate that many kids over the course of their time living with you will break the rules. So what we'd like to see is that parents and children are having open conversations about social media use, what they're seeing, what questions they may have, and what the expectations for what that use looks like. And then perhaps even having a discussion about if those rules are broken, what is the natural consequence to that? One of the things I often talk to children and families about is when I'm talking about social media is a framework of readiness. And so that allows caregivers and parents and their children to have an open conversation about what specific behaviors that are able to be measured and observed are demonstrating readiness for social media use. And what are some examples of behavior or choices that would demonstrate that child is not ready for social media use? And if they engage in those behaviors, there might then be a conversation around, when you created a second account, you showed me that you weren't really ready to use social media. It looks like we need to take a break. When we talk about readiness, what we're doing is empowering children, teenagers, to make decisions that will result in something that they want, yes, but do so much significant and important learning along the way that will help them incorporate the rules and values that you've also shared with them. It is impossible to monitor your child's social media use 24 hours a day. There are certainly apps or other ways to track certain keywords or images, things of that nature that may assist in your monitoring. But it's important, again, to come back to this idea of having open communication to help support kids when they have questions or maybe don't know what to make of a certain circumstance that they are witnessing online. One of the rules that you may establish with them is to share with them that you expect that they will let you know when they receive a message or an invite from someone that is unfamiliar to them. It is relevant to share about the consequences of misusing social media and the specific consequences that may be a result of that, that can lead to legal proceedings, disciplinary action, the loss of a cell phone, larger peer problems, things of that nature. And sharing with them that if they themselves are experiencing behavior that is harassing, that there's a group of people around them that will help them work that through so that that behavior will come to an end. One point to make about this is that before the use of phones and devices and social media, if we had a tough day, we could go home and just be with our family, be with our people. We could take a break from the intensity of a difficult moment at school or a problem that we were having. The use of social media now often prolongs that experience for people. So if your child had a tough day with the teacher and there was a public classroom conversation and peers then were maybe going over the line in terms of the feedback that they were sharing or things that they were saying to your child, before social media, they could leave the end of the day and pick that up tomorrow. And honestly, it was probably going to feel very different than it did at the end of that day. But now they might see that people are posting about it, or there's a video shown about it, or people are talking about it, and they never get that break. So wanting to also set up some expectations with your child around having specific downtime, things that they can do that are not using their phone. And gosh, there's so many. And so wanting to have some clear expectations about what they can do when they're not using their phone. That leads to a really healthy conversation and expectation around self-monitoring, which likely is not going to happen in the preteen years. There's too many confusing things happening with brain development for that. But it doesn't mean that we can't lay the seeds of that foundation to help kids understand this is too much. This does not feel good to me. I don't like how I feel if I spend too much time on my phone. I need to set up a system to take a break from that. These are important things that we can have, the important conversations that we can have with our kids. So these are 5 online safety tips that we can impart to our children. The first is having explicit conversations about what is posted. Sharing with kids that they can post something and later delete it or remove it doesn't mean that other people don't have access to that. So some questions that you might encourage your child to consider before they post something may be, would I feel embarrassed if this is shared with a grandma, with your favorite teacher? Is it possible that this would prevent you from getting a job or joining a higher education program? Really encouraging your child to consider, if I share this, will someone else feel really bad about it? The other thing that often catches kids' attention is this something that could get me into trouble? What you're trying to do is reduce a reaction and pardon me, reduce the reaction and increase the response. We just want kids to slow down, pause, think for a moment on these questions to consider, is this something that I am okay with being out in this virtual world, maybe for the rest of my life? And if they even question for a moment that they don't think so, then that is not something that they ought to post. Having conversations that really support your child to be their own person. So if they're not really sure who they are and what they want to post online, maybe they're not ready to do that just yet. Perhaps there's a child who really thinks about wanting to post about artwork that they do. That's very different than being very unclear and feeling very ungrounded and following trends that they might not really understand or totally believe in. It's important to, as in many cases, not only on social media, um, to highlight your child's sense of esteem and self-worth and agency to be who they are in all aspects of their life. In when they go to school, when they are on their club, when they participate in a performance or a sport, and also who they portray themselves as on social media. What we want to do is highlight for kids that this is absolutely going to make them feel happier in the long run, even if it means that they don't get as many likes as their peers. Again, really highlighting this very important point, not to accept friend requests or connect with people they don't know. Using age appropriate language, depending on the age and cognitive development of your child, it's important to share that there are people online who may act in dangerous ways. And we want to be thoughtful about naming that with specific behavior that is unacceptable in case they know someone who they friended who is engaging in those dangerous or concerning behaviors. But wanting to highlight that people may act any particular way online, but may behave very differently if they have an opportunity to be in the same shared physical space with that child. And again, having a rule or expectation that that your child is not adding people that they don't know in real life. Really trying to impart to children that it's important to be kind. And so these are things that we talk about from modeling, where they receive these messages of demonstrating kindness. Those messages are, of course, shared at home, at school, perhaps in other important places in a child's life. And so wanting to be thoughtful about how they can themselves be kind on social media. You may share with them that there are a lot of ways to hide behind an avatar or a made-up name, and that allows them to be mean in this virtual setting, and wanting to be clear about how they might feel or experience those same behaviors or reactions if it was directed to them. So a good rule of thumb is if you wouldn't say it to a person's face, don't say it online. That doesn't mean that that would absolve them from not saying something unkind. But ideally, what we're doing is helping to pause, think about what they'd like to say, and then make a choice rather than perhaps react in a way that later they may not approve of or you may not approve of. It's really hard nowadays to know who you actually might be interacting with online. So in comment sections, in on polls, all different ways of interacting with people. Some of those folks aren't even real. So wanting, but what's happening then is if there's information that's shared, it's possible that that information is mined and can be used uh, to share some other kind of profile that might then interest your child and lead down a path that might be unsafe or dangerous, both physically and or emotionally. And then finally, having very explicit conversations around not sending inappropriate content. I think some of us can agree that there's some content that is across the board inappropriate. This also encourages you to have a conversation about what is inappropriate based on your family's values or your expectations. Reminding your child that anyone can see a post, even if they don't share directly, because someone else has taken a screenshot and then sent it to other platforms or other places. A helpful mantra might be, once it's out there, you can't take it back. Being very clear that the images that they send fall in line with your expectations of appropriate images to help keep them safe, but also to prevent any other difficulties or challenges that may arise because they've shared inappropriate content. Reminding them that nothing online is truly private. When in doubt, don't post it. Once something is posted, others can save it, even if you've taken it down. Helping your child pause to consider what they're posting is so valuable because it allows them to ask those questions around, does this fit for me? Does this match the expectations or values of my family? And if nothing else, could I get in trouble for sharing this information online? So if there's question or doubt, the recommended advice is don't post it on social media. That brings us to the conclusion of part one of this presentation. Part two will be presented at a later date. And so we do have some time to consider any questions or comments that are coming in from the group chat. So I'm not able to access those. I'm wondering, Keith, are you able to see any questions or thoughts coming through that you could share?
Sure, certainly. Right now I don't see any, but just to remind the group, there is a Q&A panel on the bottom of your screen. There's an ellipsis button. If you click on that, there should be an icon that looks like a question mark, and it might even have Q&A next to it. If you tap or click on that, you can type out your question, and the panelists will see. We'll read those questions into the record, and Dr. Ruffieri will be able to answer.
I also appreciate that this might be content that you've heard of before. So it may not necessarily feel new. However, I do think sometimes it takes some time for it to land, to process, and to generate a question. And so if there are other questions that come up at a later date, there will be a way to field those because this sometimes can feel like a heavy topic.
One question that we have here says, are the issues similar for kids addicted to online video games? Examples of Fortnite. Any suggestions?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. That's a little bit difficult to sort through because of the ability to actually play with peers. So there are two ways to look at this: playing video games solo, not interacting with others. Although there is an interaction level, right? Someone can play video games with people they don't know, but they may not be speaking to them. Then they're using playing video games and having the ability to talk with friends, perhaps if they're on the same team or the same group. And so there are different ways to approach this particular question. I think bottom line is that when children are demonstrating difficulty, significant difficulty ending video game use, so that's typically a preferred activity. If they are having a difficult time ending this preferred activity to transition into a lesser preferred activity, and there's significant distress that occurs as a result of that, if this is the action, or pardon me, if this is the activity that the child really only has interest in exploring and spending their time, if a child has a noticeable increase in irritable mood, if a child is has changes to their patterns of sleep or appetite, these would all be important questions to explore further. So these are the markers that we want to look for in both of those categories. One thing to look at is what is the quality and the content of the conversations that are happening in those live video game moments. Is there bullying happening? Is your child experiencing FOMO? Are there other criticisms that are coming their way that don't have to do with the game? What is that experience like for them? And so at a brain level, yes, those brain structures are activated in the same way as screen time on social media. But social media, that content comes in very small doses. When you are playing one of these video games, generally they can last from 5 minutes to 45 minutes, depending on that particular session of the game. And so one of the things that we want to understand then is that deconditioning our children from being able to build stamina to sustain focus and attention. We want to appreciate and understand, is this an appropriate social connection point for our kids? And really, that's what parents get to decide. But at a brain level, these mechanisms are being lit up on an fMRI in the same way with social media, but there are significant differences between the two. But we do see that that desire for that quick hit because it feels good. And I'm going to come back to that over and over again because it does help support that rush of pleasure. So I'm not sure if gosh, I'm sure people are doing their dissertations on this, but wanting to give maybe a thumbnail sketch of some of the similarities and some of the differences, and then some of the things to look for as well.
Okay. Another question that has come in asks, how is social media different from email or text messages? Should I assume the same approach would apply to those means of communication?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because I think what you're getting at is how do I want to help my child have a relationship with all of this content? And so one of the strategies that I would recommend is to lay out expectations of how behavior will be demonstrated over email, through text messages, and how you're planning to monitor that. Again, there are some apps and other devices or services rather that will help parents or caregivers track content. However, I think having that conversation helps to inform your child around what are our values around how we respond or behave. And also, I want to help keep you safe as you're learning how to do this. So absolutely, these recommendations would also apply to the use of email and text messages. One thing that actually comes up fairly regularly for me in my clinical practice are tween age kids who really would like to have a cell phone, and maybe social media is not even an option. It's really around text messaging and how content is delivered. And that child then saying, well, I'm really worried what my mom and dad will say to me, or they'll tell my friends' parents if they use a curse word or if they say something they're not supposed to use. as a parent or caregiver, it's important for you to also say, here's how we think we would approach this unless there is a concern about safety or some other significant problem, so that encourages open conversation and discourages some of that some of the possibility to perhaps break some of the rules because your child's concerned that their friend used a curse word and now they don't know what to do in that moment. Having even those conversations can be quite useful.
Okay, and just as a reminder, if you want to type in any questions, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You click on the ellipsis button, 3 dots, and then there should be an icon for Q&A. It looks like a question mark. That'll open up a panel where you can type in your questions. So far, it looks like it was just those 2 questions. No other
Right.
questions have come in.
Yeah, well, I will take this opportunity again to extend my thanks for your care and dedication to wanting to understand the role of social media in your child's life, and would encourage you to spend some time thinking about how do you relate to social media use and how would you like to extend that relationship, values and expectations to your child. What's your framework? What are your must-dos? What are the things that are off limits? When you have some idea of what those things are for you, it's so much easier then to communicate those to your child because then these are things that you've thought of. Of course, you can't think of everything, no one can. But when you have a framework to help your child navigate this and understand how to use social media, you're really setting them up for much more success than if that conversation did not happen. So again, thank you for making time tonight to be here and to think together about how some of these strategies may be useful and helpful to you and your family.
Thank you, Aubrey, Elizabeth, Kevin, Keith, Ashaya. Uh, I know this was recorded and will be soon edited and then placed on the district's YouTube channel. We will make sure we send out an email letting folks know when it will be posted. So for those of you who want to rewatch it, you may, or pass on to friends who could not attend tonight. So we do want to thank you all for attending. We know your time is valuable. Please look for a part 2 of this workshop in the near future. And again, big thanks to our facilitator, Keith Bonds, tonight.
Thank you. And you have a community member who just wanted to express their thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.